3 years ago, she had run from her own wedding night before the marriage could be made real. 3 years of false names and cheap lodging houses. 3 years of posting letters under forged seals, of sleeping with a pair of sewing shears beneath a pillow and one hand curled tight around the handle. 3 years of praying, every morning, every night, that the man whose ring still lay hidden at the bottom of her travelling trunk believed her drowned in the Thames, as the newspapers had said. And now, God help her, she stood in the great hall of his ancestral seat. Her name, for the last 3 years, had been Miss Jane Sinclair. Her true name was Honora Lytton, or rather, it had been, until a vicar in a candlelit chapel had pronounced her the Duchess of Wycliffe, and she had signed the register with a hand that did not tremble, and smiled at her new husband, and climbed the stairs of the bridal suite, and waited until the house fell silent. Then she had climbed out of a window, stolen a mare from the stables, and ridden east until the sky turned the colour of old bruises. The marriage had never been consummated. In the eyes of the church and of any decent solicitor, it could yet be undone. She had counted on never seeing him again. The housekeeper led her up a staircase washed in gold afternoon light. 2 girls, Miss Sinclair, the master's late cousin's daughters, their last governess fled in the night. Heaven knows why. Honora murmured something grateful. Her mouth did the work her heart refused. Then the double doors at the end of the long gallery opened, and the man who stepped into the light was no stranger. He was taller than she remembered. Colder. With the same dark eyes she had last looked into across a chapel altar, while an organist played and a vicar asked her twice to repeat, "I will." Lucian Hargrave, Duke of Wycliffe, regarded her now as a man might regard a ghost he had been expecting, quite patiently, for some time. Miss Sinclair. The false name in his mouth was a blade laid lightly against her throat. Welcome to Wycliffe Hall. She could not speak. She could not breathe. The children are in the nursery, he said, his gaze never once releasing hers. I do hope, Miss Sinclair, that you will remain with us rather longer than your predecessor did. And Honora understood, with a cold and perfect clarity, that she had not escaped her husband at all. She had only given him 3 years to prepare. The housekeeper had scarcely drawn the door close behind her when he moved. Not swiftly. Nothing in Lucian Hargrave was ever swift. He crossed the long chamber at the pace of a man who had all the hours of all the days at his command, and he stopped only when the hem of his coat brushed the edge of her travelling cloak. You have kept well, madam, he said quietly. You have grown thinner. Honora kept her gaze fixed upon the painted ceiling, upon a cherub holding a ribbon in his chubby fist, upon anything that was not his face. I am Miss Sinclair, your grace. I have had no cause to be otherwise. Miss Sinclair. He tasted the syllables as a wine merchant tastes a vintage he had ordered long ago and waited long for. From the agency in Bloomsbury, I believe, the very agency that wrote to me a fortnight past, offering a governess of quiet temperament, morning dress, no family living. I confess, I was quite exacting in my requirements. She felt the trap close with the softness of a lady's fan clicking shut. You engaged the agency yourself, she whispered. I engaged every agency between here and the Scottish border. He said it as another man might speak of stabling his horses. For 3 years, 3 exceedingly long years, Honora. Her true name in his mouth was worse than any blow. She forced her gaze down from the ceiling and met his at last. He had aged. That was her first and most treacherous thought. Not cruelly, not unbeautifully, but there were fine marks now at the corners of his mouth, and his dark hair had been cropped shorter than fashion permitted, as though he could no longer be troubled with vanity. You may leave in the morning, he said. The carriage is yours. Your wages in full, a character from me, passage to any port you name. I shall not stop you. She waited. Or, he said, you may stay, and learn at last what you fled from. She had not meant to spy. 3 years gone, and still she could summon the memory whole. The weight of her bridal night dress, Belgian lace over French silk, the candles her aunt had set about the bedchamber with such trembling care, the smell of orange blossom from her hair, the way her new husband had kissed her knuckles in the chapel and called her my Duchess, in a voice low enough to make her blush beneath her veil. She had waited in the bedchamber a 1/4 hour, then half, then, because the fire had begun to die, and because she could hear voices rising from the library 2 floors below, she had taken a candle and slipped barefoot down the servants' stair, and stood in the dark passage beyond the library door. 2 men were laughing within. One was a stranger to her, the other was her husband. "And how did she take it, your new little Lytton?" the stranger was saying. "Does she know yet what she is married?" "She knows nothing. She believes herself loved," Lucian's voice, lazy, warm with brandy. "I shall let her believe it another week, I think, perhaps a month. One wants to savour these things. And the girl your Peregrine ruined? Your sister, man, does she yet rest easy?" "My sister will rest easy when the name of Lytton is a scandal on every tongue in England. I have the tool of it now, a pretty tool, a trusting one. I shall waste her, Ormsby. I shall keep her in the country and give her no child, and let the world watch a Duchess grow grey and mad and barren. And when her father dies, and he is dying, the earldom will end, and every door in London shall be closed against her brother, and the Lytton name shall rot." She had not screamed. Even then she had not screamed. She had only turned, climbed the stair, taken her mother's pearls and her father's letter of credit, and walked out of the house before the clocks had struck 1. The nursery smelt of milk and warm wool and something sweeter, the peculiar sweetness of children recently bathed. Honora stopped just inside the door, and for the first time since the carriage had rolled between the gates of Wycliffe, she remembered how to breathe. 2 small creatures sat upon the hearthrug. The elder, a girl of perhaps 8 years, was bent gravely over a slate. The younger, no more than 5, was attempting to knit a yellow stocking onto the ear of a toy rabbit. "Good evening," Honora said. The elder rose at once and curtsied with an exactness that spoke of lessons long and patient. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Clarissa. This is my sister Winnie. Our last governess did not say goodbye. I was told she is not coming back. I do not imagine she is." Winnie, without looking up, held out the rabbit. "Her ear is coming off," she informed Honora, "and Uncle Lucian says I must not ask him to mend her again, because he is not a milliner." Honora sank slowly to her knees upon the rug. She took the rabbit into her lap. Her hands, which had trembled through 3 years of false names and forged seals, did not tremble now. "Then I shall mend her," she said. "I am a fair hand at small rescues." Winnie considered her gravely. "Are you a kind one?" the child asked. And Honora, who had come into this house meaning only to survive the night, to take the carriage in the morning, to flee again as she had fled before, looked into the small, solemn face, and heard herself answer, "I shall try." Clarissa, from her post by the fire, spoke without turning. "Uncle Lucian said you would stay. He said you were old friends." "Did he?" "He does not have friends." The child's voice was careful, as children's voices are when they repeat an adult observation they do not yet understand. "I thought perhaps he was mistaken." The summons came not by servant, but by folded paper, slid beneath her door an hour after the children had been put to bed. "The library, when you are dressed, whatever hour suits you." He had not signed his Christian name. He had not signed husband. He had initialed himself as the house, Wycliffe, like a man who knew his only remaining claim upon her was the roof above her head. She went at midnight, because she would not be seen to hasten, and she would not be seen to delay. He was not reading. He was standing at the long window that looked out upon the black park, a glass of something amber untouched upon the sill, and he did not turn when she entered. "You have seen the girls?" "I have." "You will find Clarissa clever. Winnie is the sweeter of the 2, but she dreams. You will oblige me by not encouraging the dreaming." "I shall encourage what I please in them. You did not hire me for my obedience." At that he turned, and she saw, with a small cold satisfaction, that she had struck him. "No," he said, "I did not." She remained by the door. She did not sit. She did not intend to give him the courtesy of appearing at her ease. "Why am I here, your grace?" "Because I wished it." "That is not a reason. That is an appetite." She saw then the ghost of something at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, nothing so generous. Rather the faint acknowledgement of a man who had expected to wound and found himself most unexpectedly wounded. "You used to be gentler," he said. "I used to be a fool." She inclined her head with the precise civility owed by a servant to her master. "Good night, your grace." She did not run from the library. She walked, and he let her go. which was, she understood, the moment her hand touched her own door, the second trap he had set. 3 days she kept to the nursery. She took her meals there, read to Winnie until the child slept curled against her arm, set Clarissa to copying verses in French. She did not take the air upon the terrace. She did not answer the notes he sent by the footman. She wore mourning grey and plain muslin and a cap pulled low, as though she might make herself small enough to vanish beneath his roof by will alone. On the 4th afternoon, he walked into the schoolroom without knocking. Winnie flew to him, as children fly to the person whose lap is always available. Clarissa rose and curtsied with the grave exactitude she had shown Honora, but her eyes went to her uncle with a question, and he answered it with a small nod. Yes, she stays. And Honora saw in that silent exchange the shape of a house that had learnt to speak without words. "Walk with me," he said to Honora, not a request. "I am occupied, Your Grace." "You are hiding." He bent to kiss the parting in Winnie's hair and set the child gently aside. "Madam, walk with me. I shall not ask you a second time before the children." She rose. They went the length of the long gallery without speaking, past the Hargraves who had married well and the Hargraves who had died young, and he stopped at last before a small portrait in a dim corner. A girl of perhaps 17, her hair the same dark as his, her eyes too large for her face, and sorrowful. "My sister," he said. "Sophia. She hanged herself in the orangery of this house on the 5th of November, the year I was 23. Honora did not speak. "Your brother," said Lucian, "had given her a child, and a fever of the lungs, and a letter, in which he wished her every happiness in her future endeavours. The scream came a little past 2 in the morning. Honora was out of her bed before she had fully woken, her dressing gown caught up in one hand, a brass candle in the other, running barefoot along the cold passage toward the nursery. Winnie sat upright in her cot, her small face streaked and wet, her nightshift twisted about her knees. "She was in the water," she sobbed. "She was in the water, and I could not reach her. Hush, hush, my own, I am here." Honora gathered the child up. Winnie clung with a strength astonishing in so small a creature. Clarissa had sat up in the other bed, watching with her old grave eyes, saying nothing. "She dreams of your mother," Honora whispered to Clarissa, though she did not truly know it. She only felt it to be true. "She dreams of the river," said Clarissa. "She has dreamt of the river since Uncle Lucian told her you had drowned in it, ma'am. Only she did not know then that it was you." Honora's breath stopped in her throat. She turned her head. Lucian stood in the doorway. He had come in his shirt sleeves, the collar open, a candle in his hand, and his hair in disorder, and he did not look at that moment like a duke at all. He looked like a man who had been awake already, every night, for 3 years. He said nothing. He came into the room and sat upon the nursery floor beside her, and took the child half into his own arms, and between them, without a word, they rocked Winnie until she slept. When at last Honora rose to leave, he caught her wrist in the dark passage outside. "Tell me you did not know," he said, very low. "Tell me, Honora, tell me you did not know I was mourning you." She did not answer. She could not. She pulled her wrist free and went. She did not sleep. She sat at the window of her little governess's room and watched the grey come up over the park, and she turned the thing over and over in her mind as a woman turns a strange coin between her fingers, trying to read the face of it. I was mourning you. A man who had married her to destroy her name did not mourn her. A man who had spoken the words she had heard in that library, low and amused over brandy, "I shall waste her, Ormsby," did not rise in the night to rock a frightened child who had dreamt of a river. Unless she had heard only half a conversation, unless she had fled too soon. The thought was so monstrous, so nearly unbearable, that she thrust it from her and rose and dressed with hands that had begun at last to tremble. She would not ask him. She had learnt in 3 years of false names never to ask a question whose answer she could not endure. She went down to the schoolroom instead, and found him there. He sat upon the low window seat in his shirt sleeves, a book open and unread upon his knee, Winnie asleep against his shoulder with her thumb still tucked in her mouth. Clarissa was at the table copying verses with the concentration of a child who had been told, very gently, not to disturb her uncle. He looked up at Honora and did not speak. She understood that he had been waiting. "Clarissa," she said quietly, "take your sister to Mrs. Dunmore, my lamb. Tell her I said you are to have chocolate this morning, and an hour with the kittens in the stable." The child gathered her sister from her uncle's arms with practised care, and went. Honora shut the door behind them. Then she turned, and she set her back against the wood, and she said, "Tell me what I heard that night. Tell me all of it, and tell me true, Lucian, or I shall walk out of this house at noon, and you shall not find me a second time." He was a long moment in speaking. "What you heard," he said at last, "was a man lying to a worse man." She waited. "Ormsby was my sister's cousin by marriage. He had loved Sophia, or believed he had, and when she died he turned his grief into a kind of sickness. He wanted your brother dead. He wanted your father ruined. He wanted the Lytton name salted into the earth. And he was the sort of creature who counts the minutes until a thing is done." Lucian set the book aside. His hands, she saw, were not quite steady. "He had money I needed, not for debts, for Winnie's mother, my cousin, who was dying that winter in a bad house in Lambeth, and would not come to me. Ormsby paid her doctors. He paid them on the condition that I would use my marriage to ruin you." "And you agreed?" "I agreed to let him believe I had agreed." Lucian's eyes did not leave her face. "That night in the library, I was giving him what he wished to hear. I meant to send him out of England within the fortnight. I had already written to my solicitor. The letter is in the drawer of this very desk. Honora, unposted, dated the morning after our wedding, I instructing him to settle my entire northern estate upon you in your sole name and beyond any husband's power. Because I meant to tell you the truth at breakfast, and I was not certain you would stay to hear the end of it." She could not speak. "I went up to you an hour after Ormsby left. I found the window open and your pearls gone and a candle guttered on the sill, and I thought, God help me, I thought you had heard. And then the bargeman found a woman's cloak in the river 3 days later, with the Lytton monogram at the throat, and I—" He stopped. "I have been a man in mourning," he said, "for 3 years. That is the whole of it." She did not move. The air in the schoolroom was yet thick with the last of his confession, and her hand upon the door was yet cold from the wood she had set her back against. And she understood, as clearly as she had ever understood anything, that if she did not speak now, at this instant, she would speak only with her body, and be lost. "Stand up," she said. He rose. She crossed the hearthrug. She struck him once, open-handed, across the face. The sound of it was small and exact in the quiet room. A log shifted in the grate. He did not lift his hand to the mark. "I believe you," she said. "Do not mistake me. I believe every word of it. And I tell you plainly, Lucian, that belief is not forgiveness, and a letter written in a drawer is not a husband." "Honora, you had hours. You had all the hours of that long night in which to come up the stair and wake me and set that letter into my hand, and you did not. You let a frightened bride sit alone in a candlelit chamber while you amused a murderer in your library. You chose your cleverness over my peace. You chose your pride over my life. And when I ran, you mourned me. Yes, I do not doubt it. But you mourned a woman you had not troubled to tell the truth to while she yet lived." His jaw worked. He said nothing, because there was nothing. "I shall not leave Wycliffe." She drew a steadying breath. "The children need a governess, and I find that I am one. I shall sleep in the governess's room. You shall not cross that threshold. You shall not touch my hand in a corridor. You shall court me, sir, as a penitent courts mercy, daily and in full sight of your household. Or at the season's end you shall settle the northern estate upon me as you once intended, and you shall never look upon my face again. He began the next morning. He was in the breakfast room before the girls came down, and he poured her tea himself, and he did not sit until she had taken her chair. He spoke to her as a man speaks to a stranger of great consequence, gravely, quietly, asking nothing. The household noticed before the week was out. Mrs. Dunmore, who missed nothing, began to set 2 places at the nursery fire in the evenings, though only one was ever taken, for he came each night and stood a half-hour at the schoolroom door and bowed and went away again when Honora did not turn her head. He sat outside her chamber some nights. The maid who laid the fires at 5 found him there, more than once in his shirt-sleeves with a book unopened upon his knee, and he would rise and go before the corridor woke. He wrote letters Honora never read, for he burnt them in the grate of his study at dawn. The footman who cleared the ashes told Mrs. Dunmore, and Mrs. Dunmore told no one. When Ormsby's old set rode up from London, with a hamper of champagne and a card party planned, he met them in the drive and sent them back without so much as a cup of tea. Clarissa, watching from the nursery window, said gravely to her sister, "Uncle has grown quiet," and Winnie said, "Uncle has grown ours," and took her kitten off to the stable. Honora watched. She was moved some days. Other days she was not. She permitted herself no schedule of her own heart. On the 31st evening, in the schoolroom, with the snow falling soundless beyond the glass, she did not rise when he came in. He stopped in the doorway. "May I sit, madam?" "You may." He took the low chair at the other side of the fire. He did not reach for her hand. She did not offer it. Between them the fire settled, and the clock told the hour, and neither of them spoke. And it was enough. The letter came on a Tuesday. It was from her father's solicitor in London, and it was brief, and it had been some weeks in finding her, having gone first to Bloomsbury and thence to Wycliffe. Her father was dead. He had died quietly, the solicitor wrote, in the small hours of a Sunday morning, with his sister at his side and her name the last word upon his lips. He had left her everything that was his to leave, which, after the creditors, was not a great deal, but was not nothing, and he had left also a letter, sealed to be placed into her hand if she were yet living. Lucian brought the solicitor himself into the blue drawing-room, and then withdrew and closed the door upon her privacy. She broke the seal. "My Honora, I have known these 3 years that you were living. Your aunt has known. We have made no search, because you asked it in the note you left, and because we trusted, against every report in the newspapers, that a daughter who had taken her mother's pearls and her father's letter of credit was a daughter who meant to be found only when she was ready. I have prayed nightly for your safety, and for the quieting of whatever grief sent you from us. If you are reading this, then I am gone. Do not grieve long. I had a full measure of years, and a daughter who was the chief joy of them. One thing more, my dear. Your husband came to this house a month after you fled. He wept in my study, a grown man, and a duke, upon his knees upon my carpet. I should not have thought it possible. I did not tell him you were living, for I had given you my word. But I tell you now, because I think you ought to know it, and because a man who weeps for a woman he believes he has wronged is not always the man the world supposes him to be. Go gently with him, if you can. Go gently with yourself, either way. Your loving father." She folded the letter. She set it against her mouth, and she wept. At last, for the first time in 3 years, she wept, as a daughter weeps, and as a bride weeps, and as a woman weeps who has come finally, to the end of her running. They were married again upon a Sunday in late September, in the small stone chapel at the edge of the Wycliffe Park. There was no veil this time. There was no organist, no Belgian lace, no aunt trembling with the candles. There were only the two little girls in white muslin strewing rose petals with tremendous seriousness, and Mrs. Dunmore weeping into a black-bordered handkerchief at the back of the pew, and the vicar, who was old and half-deaf, and asked each of them only once now to say I will. Honora wore a gown of pale dove grey. She had put off mourning. She had not yet put on colour. She was a woman between one life and another, and she liked the honesty of it. Lucian placed his mother's ring upon her finger above the ring she had never, in 3 years, quite brought herself to sell. "I take thee, Honora," he said, and his voice held, though his eyes did not. Again, and for the last time. "And I thee," she answered. That night she came to him of her own will, in the great chamber with the windows open upon the park, and there was no haste in either of them, for they had been 3 years apart, and they had the rest of their lives, and a thing long waited for is not a thing to be hurried. Afterwards, in the dark, with her head upon his shoulder and his hand spread wide across the small of her back, as though he feared still to wake and find her gone, he said into her hair, "If ever again you hear me speak cruelly of you in a dark room, Honora, come in, strike the door open, ask me before you run." "I shall," she whispered. "I swear it." And she kept her word, for she never ran from him again. They had 3 children of their own, in the end a boy and 2 more girls, and the boy was named Peregrine, for Honora's brother, who came north to the christening and stood godfather and wept quietly into his gloves, and who lived out his days as a quiet country gentleman in Hampshire and never married, and was the favourite uncle of every niece and nephew he possessed. Clarissa grew into a cool and clever young woman, and married a Scottish earl who adored her, and wrote her aunt-mother Honora a letter every week until Honora's own death, 51 years after her second wedding, in the same great chamber with the windows open upon the park. Winnie never married. She kept her rabbit, mended at the ear by Honora's own hand, until she was a woman of 40, and she was the sweetness of her father's old age, and she painted watercolours of indifferent quality and perfect tenderness, and she was happy. As for Lucian Hargrave, Duke of Wycliffe, he outlived his wife by 11 months. He did not bear it well. He would be found in those last months sitting in the schoolroom where once a governess in grey muslin had set her back against the door and demanded the truth of him, and he would be holding in his old hands a folded letter dated the morning after a wedding, and a rabbit with a mended ear, and he would not speak to anyone for hours together. When at last he went quietly in the chair by the fire, at the hour she had used to read aloud to him. They lie together now in the small stone chapel at the edge of the Wycliffe Park, beneath a single slab that bears no title and no dukedom, only 2 names and 2 dates, and the words she had asked for. She came back. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. It amazes me to know how far my stories travel, from one quiet heart to another, across every ocean. Share this one with a friend who believes that the truth, told at last, is worth the waiting. And stay with me. I have another story to tell you tomorrow.